Welcome to Climate360 and the Climate Relay podcast series, Building. I'm Sam Redston.
And I'm Andrew Mackenzie.
This is the fourth episode in the series and takes us to meet designer Joost Bakker at the acclaimed Regenerative Futures Studio, recently completed for Woodleigh School.
Joost is known to many of you for his creative and sometimes provocative approach to food and waste, to plants and flowers, and to buildings. This isn't the first time he's been involved in a building. He's produced a number of projects over the years, but it's certainly the most ambitious, working with architects, designers, and engineers to produce a truly remarkable school.
Check our show notes below to learn more about Climate360 and subscribe to our feed. Here's Andrew and Joost.
I'm here with Joost Bakker, and we're at Woodleigh School, a new building that's demonstrating pretty advanced thinking around environment and waste in buildings. But before we get into the school and before we get into buildings, just introduce yourself a little bit to our audience in terms of who are you, where'd you come from, what inspires you, and in about 60 seconds.
Well, I'm inspired by nature. I love the natural world. I especially love old environments, old growth forests, that sort of thing. So I'm fascinated by nature and how those systems work. And yeah, I really believe that our built environment can be as exciting as an old growth forest. I think we can create systems that complement the environment, complement each other, and allow us to be more immersed in nature. So that's been my work for the last 30 years, creating art out of waste and buildings that allow nature to thrive, not just us.
Yeah. And your journey certainly seems to come from very much from the land, quite physically, in terms of your connection from the early days with farming, with seasons, with seasonality, with plants and flowers, and with food. All that stuff seems to be very much kind of like an anchor for you, that connection to the working land, not just in a way the pastoral, the kind of the, let's say, the romantic untouched landscape, but actually the working land and the farmed land is a big part of your personal background.
Yeah, and where I grew up, that was sea. So our house was 6 meters below sea level in the Netherlands, and so that idea that it was ground that's been obviously drained and some of the most fertile soils in the world, but that idea that we can create an environment that can nourish us and sustain a lot of bird life and that sort of thing. So I'm not of the opinion that humans can only have a negative impact. I think humans can have a positive impact on the environment.
Yeah, right. Okay. And so you've from that background, working with plants and with flowers and with food and with restaurants, you've more recently moved more fully into engagement with building and construction. But I should say your kind of motif, as it were, at least as most of us know you in the world, is the zero waste kind of icon. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about that, about waste.
Well, waste is a human thing. There's no other system that generates waste. Only we have come up with waste as a system, and it's just really simple changes can completely avoid waste. And so I'm a big believer in zero waste ecosystems, and I think that if we don't embrace the concept of zero waste, we're doomed as a humanity for many different reasons. But I think that we currently face a pandemic we're undernourished, and we're undernourished because we've lived in this linear system for the last 100 years where we don't put back into our system what we've taken out. So things like lithium depletion of soil, it was already 150 years ago that it was identified that plants like potatoes and cabbages take lithium out of the soil first. And as soon as that lithium is gone from the soil, you need to put that back. Well, depression and bipolar, all these things are, shown. People that suffer these things are very low in lithium. Well, that's a no-brainer because we're eating food that has been the same food has come from the same soil for in some places 150 years, and if you don't replenish those 90 elements, and we're replenishing a few, which is nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, which gives us these incredible yields, but the food is completely empty.
Yeah.
And so things like obesity are a direct result of that. It's not because we're weak or because we have all these issues. It's just that the brain is overruling your mind and saying, you know, where have we found those nutrients in fat, in salt? So we crave salty, fatty food because for 1,000,000 years, that's where those nutrients have been. So it's really our body telling us that that's what we need to eat. But then the salt and the fat that we currently have doesn't have those elements in it. So we're kind of, it to me, it's so simple. Like all these things are so simple. We need to close those systems, get those nutrients back into our food system. And
And so what's interesting here is that there's some people who are listening to this and sitting in front of a building thinking, hang on, are we talking about food? Are we talking about buildings? And yet, I think as this conversation will evolve, we'll realize actually there's a lot of interconnections, yes, between. So maybe we can talk a little bit around, I guess, how did you first decide that building was something that you were interested in and then you'd like to get more involved in?
Well, I came, so in the Netherlands when I was growing up, in grade 1, the teacher pulled my mum aside and said, your son is creative. I think he would really benefit from partnering with an artist. So she approached a landscape artist, and I spent every Wednesday afternoon from the age of 5 till the age of 9 with him, and he taught me how to, you know, start with sketch, charcoal, and then watercolor, and then oils ultimately. And that gave me an eye for how you see the landscape as an artist. He would, you know, talk to me about how the wind has affected that 300-year-old tree, or the shadows on that building, or the sky, or the sunrise, things that you don't think of as a 6 or 7-year-old, but when you're hanging out with, you know, an old landscape painter, that's what I learned. And then at the age of 9, we migrated to Australia, and suddenly I gave up on all my, that was my identity in Holland. Every one of our relatives had a painting or an artwork that I had made, and that was who I was, you know. And I'm sure that if I would have stayed in the Netherlands, I would have become a painter or an artist or a sculptor, because, you know, they're really good at kind of finding what you're really good at and then guiding you that way. Whereas in Australia, it's like, who knows what, you got to kind of make it up as you go. You know, that system is not that organized here, the schooling system, which I actually think was became beneficial to me. We migrated, and then my family started building a business, and my brothers who were not builders started building cool rooms and, you know, bunching sheds and then igloos. And then I thought, you don't actually need to be a builder to build stuff. And that sounds really silly, but like I just had that assumption that a builder built houses, a dairy farmer milks, you know, that cross-pollination of ideas. And so a cousin came over when I was 14 years old. He built a big shed for us and, you know, new rooms, and my family kind of paid for his accommodation and flights, and, you know, it was a holiday for him. And I hung out with him and I loved it. And I loved that he just used whatever, like cut up whatever he could find, you know, stuff was made out of whatever was around. And that was amazing. But the way that he'd set up the roof was that we could store heaps of stuff on there. And I thought, well, why isn't every roof designed so that, you know, to me, when you look at buildings, roofs are so light in the way that they're built. It's, you know, and in Australia, we cover it with a paper thin layer of steel. Our most prized asset that's worth millions of dollars is covered with, you know, that much steel, that's another thing. But I would have been 13 or 14 years old when I first, and it was a guy called Hundertwasser, who was an Austrian artist living in New Zealand. So my dad had a younger sister in New Zealand, so they went there for holidays, and Mum and Dad came back with a book of an architect called Hundertwasser, and all of his buildings had green roofs, and I just went, the two kind of came at the same time. And I started dreaming about building my own house. Had no intention of being an architect or a builder. I just had real interest in it. And then I would have been maybe a year later, 15. The family business was going really well, and they commissioned a 10,000 square meter glass house with a boiler room and computer systems and curtains, and the whole thing was, you know, fully automated. And the containers started to arrive from the Netherlands. And at the same time, my mum and dad were doing a renovation of a bathroom and adding a bedroom. That seemed to take a year. And there was always a mountain of shit in front of our house. Broken tiles, offcuts of...
all the waste.
And this Dutch company came in and they didn't have a bin on site. There was no bin. They built 10,000 square meters of the most complex architecture with operable roofs and curtains and irrigation, and there was no bin. There was no offcuts. Everything was designed. And I went, this is crazy. Why are we building? Why are we sending materials to a building job, and then the builder has to cut up and a third of it goes into a skip or more sometimes?
Yeah.
So, yeah, that really resonated with me, I suppose. I was 13, 14, 15 and just was observing. But what's really interesting is that my main passion was always flowers and growing flowers. And I was growing flowers when I started growing my own flowers when I was maybe 10 or 11. You know, my brothers built a little igloo for me and I started growing freesias and tulips and taking cuttings, and
wow,
I loved it. And that was going to be my life. And then I started in the early 90s. I met a guy called Tony Leonardis on the dance floor at the Chevron. And he said, let's rent a warehouse. He was into mushrooms and I was into flowers, and I kept at 4 degrees. So we fitted a place out in Market Street and we lived upstairs in the office, and that's where it all started. And because he was bringing in all these different varieties of mushrooms from all over the world, that's how I got to meet all the chefs. So they would come and collect and see what was being imported and grown here. You know, he commissioned people to grow all sorts of he really introduced me to that whole world of mushrooms. And then they were going, where are these flowers going? You know, and so I started doing flowers in restaurants. And then because I had no formal training and I was, you know, my obsession with waste, the vessels were all made from waste, you know, electrical cords or whatever.
Right.
And so then I got a really good, that just took off. And then by the late 90s, I was doing hundreds of, you know, restaurants, and then started getting asked to do artworks and create artworks, but it was always out of waste. So I was spending a lot of time in junkyards.
Yeah.
And a guy called Rod Reed, he was especially recycling a lot of electrical waste.
Right.
So that's when I became really aware of how difficult we make it to recycle building waste, electrical waste. And he used to say, like, if we just change these two things, I could completely recycle this product really easily. But because no one thinks about the end at the beginning, everyone else is thinking about selling a product.
Yes.
No one's thinking about its second life or its third life.
So that gets us into, I guess, the conversation around circularity in materials, and particularly in buildings, and also the difficulty of doing that. So not only the practical, physical difficulty of finding and sourcing and using, etc., but the kind of administrative certification, insurances, and all that kind of stuff. Can you talk a little bit around? You've recently completed a home for your mum.
Yeah.
And it feels a bit like a kind of forgive me if I say, like a grown-up project. Like it's a proper home. It actually, interestingly enough, even though it's full of innovation, it doesn't look like particularly innovative. It actually looks kind of normal, normal, quality normal, you know.
It's very deliberate for me.
Yeah, which is quite a feat, yeah. But I guess that what that hides in a way is the amount of challenges you have to go through to get there. Could you just unpack a few of those kind of things that you have a light bulb moment saying, we'll do that, and then you discover...
Well, I mean, look, so my flower career was going well, and so Jenny and I was struggling to get, like, flower growers grow everything the same size. It's all about uniformity and the monotony, really.
Yeah.
And I wanted the weird, tall, crazy stuff. So we decided to buy a farm, and I started planting it out with thousands of different varieties, and that's how it started. And then I wanted to build my own house, and I was quite hanging out a lot with Nonda Katsoulides at the time, and he gave me a lot of confidence, really, to design my own place, and he made me believe that the way that I wanted to build it was, you know, there's nothing wrong with doing it the way that I wanted to build it, but no one had ever done it like that before.
Yeah.
And so I built my own straw bale house, and the idea was to build that and then just go back to creating art and doing installations. And then, you know, Elle Carter, my friend Elle Carter, photographed it, and Anne-Marie Kiley did a story on it in Vogue, and then it got on the cover. Yeah. And then it just went like...
Because everyone's first home is on Vogue. No.
I was like, well, I mean, I couldn't believe it. And then, you know, getting emails from Milan and New York, and, you know, and I'm like, I'm not even an architect, you know. And then Rob Adams. No, what happened was Macquarie Bank. So I had done some work for Macquarie Bank, but this time they wanted to disrupt what was going on at the races. They wanted to be about sustainability. And so I came up with a concept called Greenhouse. you know, with solar powered and all. This is 2004, so it's like a long time ago.
This is like the birdcage environment, yeah?
Yeah.
Where it's all champagne and not particularly the most sustainable environment in the world.
That was why, you know, like the floor was made from recycled tires, everything. Like,
Yeah.
if I think about it now, it's crazy that we did that 20 years ago, or
Yeah,
20,
right.
21 years ago. But,
Did you get fired?
well, the CEO walked in and went, what the fuck is this? You know? So no one had actually worded him up about the fact that Macquarie had decided to go down.
Oh, I see. That would be a rude
But
surprise.
by the end of the day, and I couldn't work it out. So why are they keeping me away from? Because I had done Macquarie, Lexus as well, so I was constantly in Lexus, and I'm thinking, my schedule, I'm supposed to be at Macquarie Bank as well, but they were hiding me because this guy was losing his mind. Moss, I think his name was. Anyway, after a couple of hours, people were coming up to him saying, "Oh my God, this is so refreshing. You know, how good is this?" And then suddenly he wanted to meet me because
Okay, yeah.
you're the guy that's whatever you've done. I can't see it, but everyone else
good
can.
banker sees value suddenly kind of like emerging and like, okay.
So they said, next year, you've got double the budget. Go for it. So I came up with the greenhouse concept as a whole, of a house from the future, and the VRC knocked it back. But we had already applied for planning permission with the City of Melbourne, so Rob Adams had seen it.
Yeah.
And
Who at the time was a director of city design, yeah.
yeah. And the VRC, now I was devastated and gutted, and, you know, I couldn't believe when they knocked it back. And they said, look, if this becomes, the birdcage is about marquees, not about building houses. We don't want to be a display home village next year.
Yeah, right.
Because whatever you do, the following year, others will do something like it. So that's the reason why.
I see, right.
And, you know, and at the last minute, I actually made this cube, 6 meters high, 8 meters wide, 20 meters long, out of plasterer's angle. We used 120 kilometers
Jesus.
of 50. So my friend Rod Reed said, I've got a couple 100 kilometers of plasterer's angle that's got wet. So that they're just throwing it out. He said, I can recycle it. Maybe you can do something with it. So we made a trussed cube that sat over a marquee. It was awesome.
Right.
So we came up with that at the last minute. But Rob Adams called me after the race and said that project has to be built.
Right.
How can I help you? You know, so he introduced me to Federation Square, and that's how the greenhouse
Right, okay.
came
Right,
about.
right,
So
right.
he was determined to see it come to light, you know, and that then, because it was an event space, I then thought, well, I can't just build the building. I want to do the way, I want to have wines on tap. So I started meeting with winemakers, and they're going, I'm going to put our fucking wine on tap. We want it in a bottle, our branding, right? And I said, yeah, but you're in the Yarra Valley. You know, why wouldn't you put it on tap? You know, and so I've convinced Phil Sexton and a couple of other winemakers to do it, and it just changed. Like now, most restaurants have got, you know, at least a couple of wines on tap, and it saves all that glass. Like Phil was sending his wine to Adelaide to get bottled,
Yeah.
then shipped back to him, and then transported to restaurants, and then the restaurants are throwing the glass out, and the glass is going, you know, there's too much glass. I said, this is crazy.
Yeah.
He called me 3 years later, and he goes, Joost, you're not going to believe it. I've just sold more wine in kegs than in bottles,
Wow.
and it's saving me 27%.
Wow.
Because, you know, he didn't have to buy the bottle, and the kegs were reusable, and he had like Moscato on tap, which went crazy at the time. But, you know, and then I worked on all these other things and led to Greenhouse Perth and then Sydney, and every time I tried to push, you know,
The building, the environment.
yeah, you know, like the health department was just a fucking nightmare. You know, like I had a woman telling me that I'm going to put you in jail. All I was trying to do was serve milk with, not in a plastic bottle, then like out of a stainless steel keg.
Yeah, right, okay.
You know, I don't understand what, you know, she goes, I'm going to put you in jail. She was so angry. She was livid. And the restaurant was full, and everyone's going, what is going on? You know, so the health department were always on my back because I was trying to, you know, create situations like not use soap. So we introduced e-water, you know, which is they use in surgery
Yeah.
to clean surgical tools.
Yeah.
But, you know, try and convince the health department, no. And I said, I don't want to use toxic chemicals. All this shit just ends up in our environment, you know. So
Yeah.
I could really do an interview for 5 hours about all of the challenges just in the restaurant game, but a lot of those things stuck.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
I was in San Francisco last week, and walked into a cafe, and I saw the coffee in the tins. Now, that was something that we created
Yeah.
back in 2008 with Genovese, you know, like these ideas. It's like, why are we putting coffee beans in like 1 kilo bags, and then the cafe, at the end of the day, the cafe's just got a bin full of it's just stuff like that, you know. We just don't think.
Yeah. So what's interesting here, and the connection, I guess, one of the connections to buildings, and we will get on to Woodleigh shortly, but one of the connections that you, first of all, you described when you were young, how your brothers would knock up a shed and build this and build that, and it was the kind of a can-do thing. And of course, that story is the story of Australian suburbia, like endless Italian, Greek, English, whatever, all and the weekends building an extension and building a pop-up and doing all this stuff. And so that's kind of like deep in our kind of history. And yet at the same time, I think there's generally a conversation with most people involved in the built environment. We are so over-regulated now. Like, we are so ridiculously over-regulated, which means that when it comes to trying to create some innovation, not that this, how about changing that, how about innovating there, the line to kind of like from product innovation to certification and, you know, to the market, it's huge. So in that context, I guess, how have you managed to navigate that? How have you managed to, because you've got lots of connections with manufacturers, with fabricators and people involved in materials. How do you navigate what is an over-regulated environment and still get to build your mum's house, this school?
Well, my wife thinks I've just part of my brain lacking that every other human has. She goes, I just don't understand how you don't remember that you've repeated this process now 5 times, you've had the same result. Like, you can't do it this way. And I'm just naive and think, no, this time I'll be able to get it through, you know. So you just need to be relentless in your determination. And yeah, look, I don't post on my social media about when things go wrong or when things don't go my way, because I don't want to, I know that young people especially look up to that sense that you can achieve anything. And, you know, if you end up filling your social media up with all of the stuff,
the frustrations,
then people just go, this is all too hard. And it is too hard. I mean, Australia is, we are just so over-regulated now. The whole reason why my father left the Netherlands and came to Australia was to get away from it. And now the Netherlands is much less regulated than what we are. And it's, it's soul destroying. It stops innovation, and it makes it just so bloody hard to the point now where I'm actually looking at projects overseas, because I feel that I can't do any more here. I need to go overseas. And I'm invited a lot by countries, other countries, come and do this. And it's a shame, because we can be, and we should be leading the world with these new ideas and innovations. And but you get to a point where, you know, you just can't keep going anymore.
But you have, nevertheless, you have made significant inroads. You know, the house that you made for your mom. It's as I understand it, it's carbon negative. There's more carbon sequestration in the materials.
Which is insane when you think it's on a concrete slab.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean? It's like, but that shows you, you know, the amount of hemp joinery that's gone into that place. And
so let's go through some of that.
Because I mean, look, we've discussed this. Like the whole carbon issue for me is, I personally feel that it is distracting from the real issue. I think that the real issue is pollution generated by all the chemicals, petrochemicals in particular, methane. Why on earth we chose carbon is, I'm still scratching my head, and I'll explain why. When the discussion first started about carbon emissions, which, you know, for me, I started reading about a lot 2005, 2006, it became a big thing. We were burning gas to heat a 2-hectare glasshouse at my brother's place. And we were getting the CO2 levels up to 1,200 parts per million. And what you get when you get those levels, because we were collecting the CO2 from burning the gas.
Right.
And we were getting 25-30% heavier crops that were more resilient to pests and disease, because you're creating a much stronger plant because it can access the carbon in the air. And so you can imagine, I'm scratching my head going, isn't the carbon in the air going to actually allow plants to thrive more and be healthier? And so that didn't, but I did understand the problem that we've got with methane and with things rotting and the organic waste in the atmosphere.
And greenhouse gases. I guess the whole issue is around you trapping the heat with greenhouse gases.
Yeah, I totally get that. But I think that it has allowed a lot of other chemicals to get away with murder in the meantime, while we're all focusing on one thing, which is carbon.
Okay.
And I think that
So it's not that it's not carbon, it's just that our focus on one thing is taking our focus off lots of other things.
yeah, but I also believe that carbon will ultimately, like carbon in the atmosphere is, we're all made of carbon. I think we've chosen the wrong thing to be focused on. And like we should really be concerned about phthalates and, forever chemicals and, pesticides and insecticides. And I mean, I've kept bees now for almost 20 years. I almost didn't need to do anything. My bees just thrived. And about 6-7 years ago, I just started noticing, and other beekeepers were saying, something's not right. Well, all these different insecticides and different ways of controlling insects are being introduced, genetics, so that when an insect lands on an apricot, or whether it's a flower, that it repels it or kills it.
Yeah.
These kinds of technologies are having a dramatic effect on the overall environment. And then you've got glyphosate and so we have no idea. We're totally allowing these companies to regulate that they're safe for us. But do we know what an interaction, two other chemicals that they hadn't thought about when they interact, or what it does,
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm really concerned about that. And I'm really, but I'm also an optimist. I really think that the changes are so simple to make that, we could in 5 years' time be totally turning the whole thing around.
So let's look at some of the things in this building that has been innovative. So let's look at some of the materials. Walk me through almost a kind of do you have in your mind a kind of a pyramid of what's most important, what's slightly less important through that? Like, what are your priorities?
Every time you build a building, you take away an opportunity for that land to be habitat. That for me is the biggest thing. So why don't we make sure that when we build a building, we actually allow habitat to thrive? And this is an example of that. Like the species, some of the species on the roof have been extinct in this area for 35, 40 years because rabbits have just decimated these particular grasses, and as a result, the butterflies, the indigenous butterflies that relied on those species are gone because they don't go and visit a new plant. They've spent a long time collaborating with that single species, and now it's gone. So it means they're gone. And so I see the potential of habitat creating buildings as massive. So that's one thing, the green roof. So we've got a diversity of species that's all native, apart from the half dozen weeds I just pulled out. And the other thing is the roof is completely flat. And people think I'm crazy, but that again is because when the rain falls, I want to hold on to it. So it's like a battery. I want it to be like a bank. And so the downpipe sits 50 mil above the roof. So it's basically like a water tank. But that means that roof never dries out because it's always got access to water.
Right.
And the insulative effect of that, you don't get any heat gain in summer. You don't get any heat loss in winter from inside. So for me, probably
So that drives down the heating and cooling costs.
Yeah, like we had a guy who does geothermal come into my mum's house. He's looking at helping us with Zach's place, and then he said, I've never ever been in a building where the floor is the same temperature as the roof.
Oh, right, okay.
It's the first time.
Yeah, because there you've got water above, but you've also got like a labyrinth underneath the ground.
Yeah, but I mean the roof, it was 40 degrees, and and the roof was 23 degrees.
Right, okay.
The ceiling, that was the ceiling temperature.
Yeah, right.
But, so you've got that, and then you completely mitigate that stormwater situation, which is occurring more often. So when you get those massive downpours, they usually don't go for very long periods of time, and this roof holds on to it. And we've had situations where we've had a lot of rain in a very short period of time, and then a week later, it's still dripping,
right.
because it just completely slows that down.
Right, it holds on to the water.
Yeah. And so for me, the fact that a building can be habitat is probably the one, and actually think that a building can be more biodiverse than what existed before. Because if you look at the plants here in January, it was really dry. In February, the plants here struggle. But because of the rain that fell before Christmas,
yes,
the plants could still access the water up there. And so you had this situation where everything was
The
dead.
same plants up there as down here.
And the building, when they did put a one of those bloody, what do you call them, drone up, the guys are ringing going, you're not going to believe it, like the building is completely green and everything is dead. And it's not because we're irrigating it, it's because we've got that simple idea of you're storing it.
Yeah. But then you've got other things as well. You've used a lot of Durapanel.
Yeah,
which
I'm obsessed with straw, yeah.
Used to be called Stramit, made by straw. And so that's got amazing thermal qualities. It's reusing what is otherwise a waste product, yeah?
It is the most wasted material on the planet.
Straw.
Yep, there's nothing that comes close.
Right.
You can think about all the plastic and food waste, nothing. There's 500 million farmers that produce straw. And in a place like Bali, they grow 2.5 crops a year. So they don't just grow it like here we might grow wheat and we've got straw once.
Yes.
In Bali, they've got it 2.5 times because they can plant 2 or 3 crops a year, because of the climate. And sadly, still most is burned. And in a place like California, where I just was, I went to an MDF factory there that is trying to make MDF out of straw. They banned the burning of straw stubble in 1994. And so they now flood the field, which means that it now turns to methane.
Oh, jeez.
And so the rice growers
it's a methane manufacturing machine then, yeah?
Yeah.
Right.
So the rice growers are now responsible for 5% of all of California's emissions.
Wow.
So, and again, why aren't we using it in our buildings?
So they've got a factory now that can turn that straw into the equivalent of what we call MDF.
Yeah, particle board MDF, and 300,000 tons of material they can make per year. But it only uses 5% of the straw that's being generated in the valley.
Jeez, okay.
And when you look at this plant, it is like the machine that makes it is 200 meters long.
Yeah.
You're talking about huge volumes.
And presumably here, Durapanel have pretty big machines. And presumably it's using local straw, is it?
Yeah.
Right, okay.
I mean, most of it comes from within 100 kilometers. I mean, it makes sense, right? You don't want to get straw.
Yes.
And there's plenty of it, so
So they just got supply arrangements with farmers, and it's a way for them to use their waste product, well, what was once a waste product, as a new building material, yeah?
Yeah, no, I've introduced a lot of builders to it over the years, and I remember in 2022, a builder called me who's been using it for about 8 years, had been using it for about 8 years, and he goes, it's the only building product that didn't go up in price.
Is that right? Wow.
And that made sense, right? Because the farmers, they weren't charging more because it's a waste product, and their costs didn't really change. It was all local manufacturing, and so to me that's just a no-brainer. So straw, it's there's a lot of straw in this building. There's a double skin. We've got insulation that's made in my mum's house. I used hemp.
Hemp, yeah.
But
You've got a bit of hemp in here in the kitchen units.
There's lots of hemp in this building, but not as insulation. And I just didn't feel it was right to bring in insulation from the UK.
Yeah.
When we're making, we've got an oversupply of glass, and there's some really good insulation being made here from recycled glass. Right. So that's here. But then all the desks, all the joinery, all the sliding doors, they're all made from hemp that was grown in Hillston, New South Wales. And I'm really proud of that.
Yeah. And so you've got a manufacturer, is it Hexcore that we're doing that?
It's good. We've actually changed the name to Hempcore.
Hempcore. Okay.
I'm involved in that business.
Oh, you are? Okay.
Yeah.
You've got skin in the game.
I decided to because I just thought...
There's money here.
No, there's not money. There's an opportunity to change the world.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Like, soil-borne diseases on farms is a massive issue.
Soil-borne
disease.
Right.
So what we've done is we're monocropping. If you go back to agriculture 100 years ago, you would never plant the same crop more than once every 5 years.
Yeah.
Because you didn't have, the chemical applications to get rid of diseases that was a natural way to make sure that diseases didn't occur. I mean, the Irish potato famine was really because of the constant, growing of the same plant. And then chemicals came along, and suddenly we're now growing the same thing over and over again, but now there's resistant fusariums and fungal diseases and all sorts of bacterias that are becoming such a problem, and hemp is the number one way to restore balance. So what happens with a hemp plant, it grows to about, the crop that we harvested was 4.5 meters, and it grew that tall in 100 days, and the root system went down 2 meters. Well, we dug down to 2 meters and there was still roots there.
Wow.
So you know.
Wow.
And so what happens is you only harvest the top, but then the root system stays in the ground and dies. And the taproot is like a big funnel that
straw.
allows water to penetrate deep, but also the
Air.
hemp pulls all of the nutrients up that's buried deep, because those constant applications of synthetic fertilizer basically sit too deep for the crops to access.
Right.
So what you get after hemp is you there's one farm that's got their inputs down to $150 a hectare. Their normal inputs are $2,500 a hectare.
Wow. 'Cause
Following
the soil's so depleted.
Yeah, following a hemp crop.
Uh-huh.
So if you were to plant, say, a canola or sorghum, so it's the ultimate material. Like, and I've always loved that idea that farmers, whether it's agroforestry or whether it's, our farmers should be supplying the raw materials for our buildings, and they can.
Yeah, right. Wow.
The other thing is, like, a hemp block sequesters carbon for 50 years. It gets saturated. It takes about 50 years for a hemp block to get saturated. People don't understand that.
What's a hemp block?
A hemp block is like cement made from hemp and lime.
Right. Okay.
And it basically...
hempcrete.
Hempcrete, yeah.
Yeah.
And it gets heavier.
It gets heavier. Oh, because it's absorbing.
Yeah.
Right.
You can actually put it on scale for a week, especially in a high...
For a week. It gets heavier in a
You
week.
can notice it. At the start, it absorbs a lot more carbon, then as it gets older, it absorbs less. But ultimately, it gets completely...
Is that right? It gets heavier.
So that's what people don't understand. When you use... And that's why a lot of the desks here, they're raw underneath.
Okay.
I wanted to leave
so
the
they'll-
materials so they keep... Like, if you look at the joinery, I love keeping the edges raw.
Yeah.
Because it pulls in carbon from the atmosphere, so it actually cleans. And then the other thing that we've done is we've added charcoal made from hemp.
Right.
So that then even amplifies it even more.
Biochar. Is that what you...
Biochar, yeah.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Another product I'm obsessed with. Anyway, I mean, there's a lot in this. You know, the floors made from linoleum, flax.
Okay. Yeah.
You know, that
I like
was invented 160 years ago.
Yeah.
Like vinyl.
Like Forbo, like this. Is that-
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I went to the Forbo factory long time ago. And I
In the
couldn't
Netherlands or
in the Netherlands.
Yeah, that's right near where I'm coming from.
And I couldn't believe that when you see all the materials already, it's really wood flour.
Yeah.
It's really resin. It's really, what's the third one? Linseed oil. I
Yeah,
think.
and silica. They use a
So-
little.
yeah, but it's like there's 4 products, and they're all like raw products. And then you see this thing, and then later that day, that's the linoleum coming out. It's
Yeah.
just like magic. Yeah.
Well, vinyl was a copy, just like Laminex.
Yes.
You know, the original, like we're in there, everyone thinks it's Laminex. No, it's
for
linoleum.
Yeah. Which also has, of course, lots of health properties. So it's antibacterial and.
Well, I've known about the product because the factory, and you could see the flax growing in the field. You know, it's this beautiful crop that doesn't get very tall, but it kind of moves in the wind, and it's got thousands of tiny little blue flowers.
Yes.
And then that produces the seed head, and the seed gets crushed, and that produces the oil, and the stalks get turned into linen.
Yeah. Right.
So,
Okay.
the whole plant is used.
I didn't know about the linen.
Yeah, so your shirt comes from the stalk but the flax seed is the seed, and
Yeah.
when it dries, you shake it, and you can hear all the seeds.
Right. Okay.
And you can see it growing here along roads because there was a lot of linen flax grown 100 years ago.
Yeah.
Because we were producing clothing and that sort of thing, and so they just got wild and have grown all around the countryside ever since.
With this building, what have been the greatest headaches?
This one has been a breeze.
Yeah.
No, I'm not kidding. I mean, a couple of consultants I wanted to kill.
Okay. It's been a breeze.
The principal came to me at Future Food System and said, I want you to design a school like this. And, like I've been asked to do a lot of things, and then things get watered down, and ultimately you're left with like a skeleton of what was the original vision was, And I came here, met with him, and I got the sense that they were really serious about doing something, that was very true to the original vision. And then I met with the board, and all the board members gave me confidence that they were going to see this through. And Frank Burridge,
Your architect.
Yeah, McEldowney partners were just unbelievable. They backed it from the get-go. And we just had a really good team, and the school just really wanted to do it. I mean, down to the point where we were actually thinking about planting the hemp here. for the desks.
Really?
We would have done it, but we missed out on the season, you know,
Right, okay.
because the school got approval so quickly. It all happened so fast. I mean, we started building in late April,
Yeah.
and then
Wow.
that building was handed over in Christmas.
Right, okay. So here's a tricky question though. I mean, obviously, this school it's a private school. In terms of cost, how do you have an order in which, I mean, a degree to which this might be more expensive or not more expensive than a standard state school? Where do you
Well, we
think
had
it
the
sits?
state education minister here,
Yeah.
and when we talked about how much it cost per square metre,
Yeah.
this would be the cheapest public school built in the last 2 years. Now,
Really?
how insane is that?
No, you're not serious, really?
I'm serious. Yes, it came to just under $8,000 a square metre. At the moment, public schools are getting built for between $8,000 and $10,000 a square metre.
Wow.
And
Wow.
that just, it
Okay.
actually made me angry because I thought we've got batteries, we've got solar,
You get
we've
so
got,
much. Yeah. The operational cost of this will be a fraction, presumably, of a state school.
well, it's designed to run, we've designed it for 120%. So there will be days, and because the school has this long-term plan to go, you know, to have a centralised energy grid,
Yep.
we are connected to the mains power. But I mean, the very first day it was 40 degrees and we were still sending power back into the grid. And that was a
Really?
real test because, you know, all the air conditioners were running, but yeah, the solar systems worked really well, the batteries worked well, and it was so well insulated that, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it actually, that, you know, I should have been proud, but I wasn't proud. I was actually just annoyed.
Yeah.
Because, you know, my youngest, Remy, goes to a state school, and the design is shocking, and, you know, it was an $11 million extension, and
Yeah.
I just thought, that's just not right. You know, why are these poorly operating and functioning buildings and poorly designed buildings not?
So, what would your answer to that? I mean, to the best do you understand? Why do you think that state is electing to build less effective, less efficient, less comfortable, less healthy buildings and pay more for that?
Well, Frank, one of the main reasons Frank believes it was so economical to build was because I've really thought about the buildability of the building. And, you know, we had 12 different builders that wanted to build this building, and they all came up to mums and saw mums being built so they could see how it was bolted together. You know, the whole thing is designed to not have any waste. So the trusses that hold the soil in the roof are 600 deep, or they're actually 595, so they're half a Dura panel. So, you know, everything is designed around not having waste, and that has a big impact, and it's quick build. Even the builders, they said, we thought we would get it built quickly, but we didn't think it would go up as quickly as what it has, and it's really just because the system is,
Okay. So it's a design system.
it's the system, and it goes back to that glass house.
Yeah.
You know, that glass house went up so quick in 6 weeks. 1 hectare of glass was, you know,
Yeah.
they kept telling my dad and my brothers, you'll be able to plant lilies here in 6 weeks. And we just thought, you're out of, like, we've got a fucking bathroom that's taken a year to, you know what I mean? But everything, this is all the rooms are designed to the same trusses. You know, the fabricator only needs to make one size truss.
Yeah.
And you can turn it around. It doesn't
Yeah.
matter, like we punch extra holes, so it doesn't matter if it flips around another way.
Is there a possibility, or maybe put another way, what stops this from being templated design? I mean,
Well, the school has open sourced this design, and we are talking to quite a few schools that have reached out.
okay.
So, and two are public.
Yeah.
So the education department's given them a budget.
Yeah.
They've heard about this, and they've reached out to us, to
Wow.
me and to Frank also, and said, you know, can we use the system there?
Yeah. Right. Okay. Wow. Should we get up on the roof and have a look?
Yeah, sure.
Let's go up on the roof. While the light's still good.